Welcome to the Voodoo Power Podcast.
Welcome to Plates and Pancakes. We're sitting down today with Chris Kerr. Coach Kerr is the Director of Strength and Conditioning for club sports at Liberty University. Kerr's role is developing club sports student athletes physically and mentally while overseeing the strength and conditioning staff across all sports. His goal is to create better individual parts for a better whole. Coach Kerr was on staff to see the first two national championships in the department's history in both wrestling and the women's hockey team. In Kerr's tenure with the Liberty hockey teams, they have won 4 national championships. Coach Kerr is a USAW Level 1 certified, RPR, functional movement systems, and has a CSCS. Coach Kerr is also co-host of Victory Over Self podcast that strives to bring on great coaches that provide an unbelievable resource for the strength community. So welcome to the show, Coach.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm awestruck by your guest list. If I could just start it out that way. Just tons of people that I've stolen from, learned from, would call mentors. So to be invited on, it's an extreme honor, and hopefully I do them all proud here, and don't make too much of a fool of myself. So thanks.
Well, you think you're awestruck. Sometimes I look at it and I'm like, why in the world do these guys want to sit down and talk on this podcast? But
you ask good questions. That's why. Yeah, it's a good conversation every time. I said before we started recording, within the last couple months, this has been one of my main go-tos. I do enjoy like you're bouncing around in all these different areas. Yeah, sorry to cut you off there, but just wanted to get it out there. Here's probably why. Yeah.
Well, I don't know, but I've enjoyed every single one of them, and they've all gotten to be friends, and just it's a great community to be a part of. And you know that. I mean, from where you're at and what you guys are doing with an unbelievable podcast, it's just it never surprises me how wonderful these coaches are.
No, it's so true. And it just, in my time, I've been fortunate being at Liberty where we're well funded. So I've been able to travel with teams and meet coaches on, team travel games, weekends and whatever else, or just fly out to Chicago, to Texas, wherever. And, I haven't met a bad person yet, if that makes sense. And like, just is what it is. Like I've walked in the doors at Westside and was greeted with like open arms by Louis, a bunch of his guys. And it's awesome. It's really fun to be a part of. And hopefully, more and more people could feel that way and experience things like that.
Now, before we get into some of that, because I do have questions on that, as I was researching your stuff, going back and listening to old podcasts, prepping for this, I do have some questions on it. But there was one thing you said, and I think it may have been a Simply Faster article you wrote. Okay. And it said, when you start, you have no idea what you're doing. Fast forward to the future, and it seems like you still don't know what you're doing. I kind of felt that when you said that. Mm-hmm. So do you still feel that way, or do you think you're narrowing some stuff down?
No, it's I've kind of come to my conclusion now of, as you get older or as you kind of learn more, you more so are figuring out what doesn't work, if that makes sense, right? Through all your failures, through your trials and tribulations and whatever else of, okay, that doesn't work. But then you hop on a podcast and start listening, and it's completely working for somebody else and their setting and their scenario, if that sort of makes sense. But you and I talked about this over text of just the imposter syndrome, right? We could have a great workout with a team or an individual athlete and just think like, I know it all, like I'm the man. And then the very next day or the very next workout, everything goes wrong, goes poorly, and we kind of go back to the drawing board. But I think it was Tony Holler at a Feed the Cat seminar in January in Charlotte, North Carolina. Mark Hoover hosted it. Tony was just describing it as like, coach, it's like the myth of the guy like rolling the ball up the hill. And no matter what, as soon as you get to the top, it's either going over the other side or coming back down on you. And then you just start it all over again. Right. And that's it's kind of what this field is. It's, we're rolling this boulder up the hill. And just when we start to think like, oh, I got it figured out, like, boom, it's rolling right back down. You kind of start it all over again. But if you're somebody who enjoys that kind of suffering, so to speak, this is the greatest job in the world. And I wouldn't want to change it for anything. But yeah, I can't say after a decade in the business, so to speak, that I'm any wiser, smarter, whatever than in my first year. Learned a lot of mistakes along the way, but still always just trying to figure it out, find the magic bullet, find Bigfoot, all that.
Well, and the longer you're in it, the more you find out you don't know. So then the rabbit hole gets deeper, and you start looking at different avenues. It never stops. You're almost ignorantly blissful when you first start, and then all of a sudden,
absolutely,
when I started this, I was just dead set West Side. That's wow, I'm just doing this. Well, then all of a sudden, I found Chris Corfist, and then all of a sudden I started listening to Tony Holler, and then all of a sudden, Cal Dietz come in the mix, and then you got, Brandon Bird and some of these other guys, and it's like, holy cow, this whole arena of sports and strength and conditioning is so huge.
It's massive.
How do you navigate it?
Yeah, I was literally the exact same way, word for word with all those guys. Got in it, and I think too, like the 4 levels of learning. It's like you don't even know what you don't know, so unconsciously incompetent, and then what you don't know, consciously incompetent, and eventually unconscious competence. Same with like learning a new skill or whatever else. But yeah, when I first started, I just didn't know what I didn't know, right? Like I remember reading everything that Louis put out, and it was like, okay, perfect. Yeah, I just do this and it's going to work great. And in some degree, like, yes, it's absolutely true. Like he's, let's just say he's a genius, either by surrounding himself with the right people or by getting enough content out there. And I've learned a ton from him, but I slowly realized too, like, all right, maybe all this powerlifting isn't the best for this, women's hockey team. Maybe I need to modify things a little bit. And yeah, then you start going down those other rabbit holes. But yeah, every guy you just mentioned there I've learned a ton from, and tried to implement everything I could from all of them.
That's kind of where the first section of this podcast was going, is working through so many ideas and modalities, keeping them straight, not throwing the programming away that you'd built to chase a new idea, but slowly integrating some ideas to see how they work. What kind of process was that for you?
No, that's a great question. So I've been fortunate to have a lot of graduate assistants under me from my time at Liberty. So since 2015, I've had 2 every year, like the different life cycles of 2-year intervals. And what I've always said to them, or interns or just undergrad students at Liberty, is like, once year to year your program starts looking a little bit similar, you've started to kind of like get on a right path there. So if I could look back after 3 years and look somewhat similar-ish to what I'm doing now, okay, I've started to establish something that I start to believe in, and I think works. But man, my first few years, it was all just like pure experimentation. And where I went wrong is I didn't seek out mentors as hard as I could right out of the gate. And so it was too much trial and error on my part, where if I had just really sunk my teeth into 3 or 4 different people in kind of different areas, I could have learned as much as possible. So what I used to say is, I used to kind of cast a net, and I would catch all these little kind of small fish, all these kind of little tidbits of things, versus now I try to completely drop a line and reel in that big, massive tuna of education. So, I mean, I've casted a line into the Chris Corfist, Cal Dietz world for a couple of years now, and tried to just soak up everything. But yeah, just to kind of make that question, or the answer to that question, simple, just track as much as you possibly can, get as much feedback from the athletes that you're with as you can, and then doing that slowly, you'll just start to do a better job than if you hadn't done that. And that works for me in my level in the college world. Might not work well for somebody in the private world or professional, or coaching a high school, but that's what's gone well for me. Just track as much as I can, and then just ask for feedback. Like the athletes will be honest with you. Hey, this sucks. This hurt. Like, this hurts my shoulders a lot. This hurts my hips a lot. Like, okay, we're going to scrap that and we'll find something else. And hasn't led me wrong so far.
Kind of on the same topic here. programming, there's a lot of pieces you want to put in, and you put them in and then you see benefits. Let's take jumps, for example, because that's kind of where I'm at right now on how to program jumps. Well, there's so many jumps. There's thousands of jumps you can do, and they all have benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Did you find a way to organize that? That's kind of what I'm looking at now is, we have some free jumps and we have chain jumps and we have banded jumps, and we're waving them and trying to program them like on their own program. How do you keep these ideas where they're just not like free radicals and you're able to corral them and get athletes heading in the right direction, but you can see the benefit of what you're doing?
Great question. So I am highly, highly influenced and impacted by, I'm going to call it Cal Dietz's periodization styles or schemes, kind of like a block training type of deal. And just every exercise that he's put on YouTube and his manuals and his books and conferences and seminars, just absorbing as much as that as possible. And then through Chris Corfist, I've really learned I really like to break things up into an acceleration focus type of day or exercise and a top end speed focus day or exercise. And where I first started learning that would have been March of 2019. I started reading James Smith's book, Applied Sprint Training. And if anyone's ever read James the Thinker Smith, you're going to be like, oh man, like you're going to have to read each sentence a couple times because it is just a different level. Like dude is operating on a different computing system than me. So in that book, I really learned from James of deep knee bend exercises help with acceleration. Shallow knee bend exercises help with top end speed. Right. So if we're thinking about jumps and we're trying to think of max velocity sprinting, I want the shallowest knee bend possible because when my foot is hitting the ground, I don't have much of a knee bend. When I'm starting to think of acceleration focused or emphasized exercises or sprinting, I'm going to have a deeper knee bend, right? Think of coming out of the blocks or starting off deep knee bend, more forward torso lean and all that, and then slowly you're upright and you're sprinting, very shallow knee bend during ground contact. So I view jumps from that manner. Is this jump going to help with acceleration, or is this jump going to help with top end speed? Really, regardless of the sport, that's kind of how I view it. Just those kind of like body shapes and positions. The sport I primarily work with is hockey, and even though they're in deep knee bend angles and positions all the time, the just hitting those maximal velocities is important off the ice because they're going to move just as fast on the ice as off ice, right? They're going to be hitting over 20 miles per hour. So I view it from that approach first and foremost of deep versus shallow knee bend. And then from there, I start to just kind of walk the spectrum of heavy versus overspeed. So we're going to weigh it down. We're going to work on the more force end of things. We're going to unweight it and start to work on the more higher end velocity sort of things. So once I kind of categorize those exercises based off of a lot of knee bend or not a lot of knee bend, then you could throw in any sort of variation you want in there. And then depending on your kind of goal for the day, for the week, if you're addressing weaknesses within an athlete, everything will start to make sense. So for example, I have the capability with my 1080 sprint to force velocity profile athletes. If I find that they lack horizontal strength or they lack just the ability to push out horizontally, if their rate of force max, for example, isn't where I want it, I'm going to say, okay, I need something strength based or focused with deeper knee bends or angles. What exercises are in my repertoire for that? A trap bar jump, a dumbbell jump, a split stance, dropping down and popping up type of jump, right? So you can really start to take just that simple, deep, shallow knee bend and really build it out from there.
Now, we've mentioned both these guys quite a bit, Corfist and Dietz, and both of them were just genuinely good humans. But Dietz, I didn't know what to expect with him, right? It's Cal Dietz. He gets treated like superhuman when you talk to people.
Yeah.
And he come on the podcast, and I'll tell you what, that guy is one of the most genuinely nice people
Oh, yeah.
He talked forever. He answered every question.
Mhm.
Afterwards, he wasn't in a rush to get off. So, just his personality changed my thinking on, I don't know, maybe I'm anti-authoritarian or whatever, but when
Yeah.
somebody puts a guy up on a pedestal, you're like, should he really be up there?
Mhm.
Yeah, maybe he should be up there. When you get to know him, he's very open-minded. I didn't expect that. And,
Mhm.
that was really cool. He's like, I reserve the right to change my mind,
Yeah.
and so I just wanted to at least hit on that for people that don't know or haven't studied his stuff or don't really know him. If you have a chance, he's salt of the earth. He'll help
Yeah.
you any way he possibly can.
And I'll throw in another tip in there. I learned this accidentally. I now just coach our hockey teams at Liberty, but at one point I was coaching our men's wrestling team, and they give out great gear. So I was wearing a wrestling shirt at a conference, and I was asking Cal some questions, and he kept looking at my chest, looking up at me, looking at my chest, looking up at me as we're talking. And then lo and behold, later I find out when he was in college, he played football and wrestled. And then speaking with Chris Corfus, he's like, "Oh yeah, Cal loves wrestling. He just works in hockey." But yeah, if you could wear a wrestling T-shirt, if you're ever going to be in a room with Cal Dietz asking him questions, he will give you a lot more time of the day when there's a big crowd of people because he does enjoy that sport. So there's a little tip for the listeners there.
So we'll kind of get off that rabbit hole. We might end up back down it. Who knows? But we'll go down a Louis Simmons rabbit hole. You were just talking about acceleration, and you were just talking about hockey players and top speed, knee bend for what you wanted and matching it. Now, Louis in his sprint manual it may have even been on his DVD that he talks about, his digital downloads, which those a lot of times you can catch them on sale at westside.com, and they're like $5. They're some of the best $5 you could ever spend. His sprint one, his football one, both are very, very good. But in there, he talks about let's just take the 100 for instance, and then we'll come back to where I want to be with the question. If 65% of the 100 is acceleration, you should practice acceleration 65% of the time. If 35% is top speed, well, then you manage your time that way. Hockey and other sports that spend an enormous amount of time in acceleration, how much should you work on acceleration and how much should you be getting up and bumping top speed? You have to hit top speed to get the body to change. But should we be so focused on top speed that the acceleration doesn't get the work it needs?
That's a great question, and I think it's going to be up to each individual coach, right? Like everyone's going to have their own beliefs based off of their athletes, their logistics. Like you might have a guy when you're training hockey players, typically they're in weight rooms inside an ice rink. So a typical ice rink setup is you have 2 sheets of ice, and then you have an upstairs weight room. That's kind of just is what it is. So you might only have a 20-yard weight room. You're not going to be able to hit top speeds. So, you might have a private guy who's having tremendous results, only training acceleration, and then doing some, Cal Dietz band smacking exercises for their max velocity. And they're going to get great results and say, you don't need to work top speed. And like, you might have another guy who, in their facility, they have access to a lot of turf and they hit top speed all the time. So I don't want to really, try to pigeonhole too many people. There's going to be great results with anything, but I could give my experiences. And so in season versus out of season is completely different. When I'm in season, I train acceleration every day that I have a team possible. So typically college setting, we're getting two good weight room sessions a week, and we're going to train a 10 to 20 meter acceleration, whether it's just a normal sprint, sprinting with a sled or pushing a sled or sprinting on my 1080. In the off season though, I really enjoy the model of Monday, Wednesday, Friday are high intensity days. I run a true high low program that Charlie Francis created there. And Mondays and Fridays are my acceleration days, and Wednesdays my top speed. So on Wednesdays, we're getting out to a lacrosse field and we're opening it up. 30, I typically don't go over 30 meters because they're going to hit top speed there. And they're not the best runners. If you've ever seen a hockey player sprint, So 30 meters, we're doing lightly resisted and we're getting pulled over speed as well. And the adaptations that I've seen from maximal velocity sprinting with hockey players at a true off season throughout the summer have been pretty remarkable. Like they have absolutely transferred to the ice. Just their ability to process things easier. The game's going to slow down, right? Like Tony Holler always gives the example. If I could sprint at 21 miles per hour and the game is played at 18, the game seems slow to me. So every coach is going to have to really make their own decisions on what they want to do. Hockey, like most sports, even, American football, like basketball, whatever else, it's very acceleration based and focused. And to me, you could get a lot of bang for your buck because the stronger you get, the better you'll get at acceleration. Most people are weak. You get them strong. You work on acceleration. Good things are going to happen. It's a little bit safer. But for me, in my setting, 2 acceleration workouts a week and 1 max velocity have worked really well. And yeah, I've gotten great results with that.
Now you've kind of studied it all like a lot of us probably have. The Russians, West Side, Corfist, Dietz. The one that I listened to one of your guys' podcasts, and man, I loved it, was the DB Hammer rabbit hole.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
It's a difficult book to read. You got to kind of break it down and you almost got to microdose it because there's a ton in there.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of his concepts aren't crazy far off from where West Side was and where Louis was. So you can kind of attach those and make headway in the book.
Mm-hmm.
That book, you almost got to know somebody. It's very underground. You got to know somebody that sends it to you. You can't just like find it.
Yeah.
So in the underground world of DB Hammer, how much influence has that had on you?
Like indescribable amounts of influence. And so the background of how we got into it, at some point talking with Chris Corfist or a podcast or whatever, DB Hammer got brought up. And I'm super fortunate, super blessed to have such a great relationship with the guys we do our podcast with, Blair Bennett, Ross Garner. And somehow, like, I don't know, like Blair's just a magnet for finding information and for the underground. He will always just send us random PDFs of like, found this, somebody sent me this. And so he sent Ross and I, once Blair moved up to Massachusetts, sent us DB Hammer's book. Ross read it first, kind of ripped through some things. I was too intimidated. I was like, I'm not ready for this yet. And then I eventually kind of sunk my teeth into it. But what auto regulation, as described in DB Hammer's book, did for me was really help me understand that what we've been reading in books is kind of a lie. And so far that like 4 to 6 sets, is kind of the commonality, but it might not be where your athlete is like truly getting the most out of that day. And then you might have athletes where, doing 6 sets is just going to crush them and they won't be ready for the next day. So in my off season where, I could spend a little bit more time and fully auto regulate things, we're doing that. And you could see throughout a summer, the fitness qualities that get improved. You could see throughout a summer, the confidence that starts to come about. So I run bastardized French contrast type of method for various reasons. I really like that. And when you are auto-regulating, someone can get 8 sets. And let's just say there's 4 exercises per set of high power output. And now they're doing 32 sets in total of high power output exercises. You tell me that's not conditioning, right? And then especially for hockey, it has that, go, relax, go, relax, recover, high power output, throttle back type of conditioning effect to it. And when we hit the ice in August, September, like we're just monsters. We're just a different level of human. And so the auto regulation piece is massive. And then I think I said in the podcast when I read about the static spring in DB Hammer's book, like I literally turned to my wife and I was like, I understand everything. I completely get it now. I understand. So the word co-contraction gets thrown out a lot. And essentially that's just a brief time where everything is squeezing and having an isometric contraction. right? So if I go to slam my hand down and I stop it right before I hit this table, everything is flexing, squeezing to stop me from hitting that table. So as I go up and down with my hand, there's that moment where there's going to be a co-contraction. As my body is hitting something, somebody hitting the ground, at a brief moment in time, everything squeezes, and then your brain starts to process what should fire, what should relax, and that's what gets you continuing to move. So with the static spring, the static portion is the strength portion. When I am, let's just say we're sprinting, when my one foot hits the ground, I need every single muscle in my foot, in my ankle, around my knee, around my hip, around my opposite QL, all the way up to my shoulder to completely fire in lockdown, right? And you can only do that if you're strong. If you're weak, you're going to get deformation. You're going to be on the ground too long. Bad things are going to happen. So you need all that muscle. You need all that strength for that static part. Boom, and it locks you in. And then from there, once you have that static, that's what allows your tendons to load up and eventually spring you forward. And the fastest runners, the fastest athletes, the most explosive are incredibly strong for their body weight, and they can load the heck out of those tendons and explode. So if you don't have that static portion to lock down your joints, then your tendons can't load and explode, and you're not going to have that spring. So once I got that, I was like, that's why we strength train. Like, that's why it's so important to be strong. That's why we're doing all these exercises, because we need our body to be able to lock down those joints, have that brief moment of co-contraction, that static, and then allow the tendons to do what they do. And also too, like, that's why it's important to train tendons, because if the whole system is functioning and working properly, oh boy, look out. Like, you're going to have a freak. That's how you have these NBA players who, they can't lift 100 pounds, but they could drive down the lane, plant their foot, everything locks down, and then they just spring up for, 360 windmill dunk type of thing. So just those two, auto regulation and the static spring effect behind training, as well as he just, like, in his book, he just hammers power. Like, power is it. And so you really start to wrap your mind around force times velocity equals power. How do I improve that within my athletes? Where are their weaknesses? Where am I having power leaks through poor movement, whatever else? And then, you combine a lot of cool, sexy exercises he's got, and it was my Bible. I literally, like, it's I'll show off, I guess. I keep it in my backpack at all times. Best sports training book ever. Yeah, I always have it just in case I need to refer back to it for something.
We'll see. And then I feel like, and you touched on it there at the end, I think I stumbled on it a little bit before I read his book, and then kind of like you, it was like a light bulb went off, is if you're not careful, your athletes will learn to almost shed forces that they need to absorb, and you'll get leakage because of poor movement, or not understanding that, hey, I need to absorb them forces because I need it to reverse. So, if you're sprinting, that leg has to absorb the force of the ground.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you can't reverse at the same force you put in the ground, and your body has to neurologically, however you want to describe it, it's almost like it auto regulates. So if you put 800 pounds of pressure into the ground, well, if your body can't handle that, well, the next step's not going to be 800.
Yeah.
You almost lose, like, I don't know how I want to explain it to make it make sense, but your body has to find a spot that it's comfortable. And then once he started hitting on that, I'm like, yeah, okay, so maybe I am down the right rabbit hole. How these guys land on a depth jump matters. How they catch on a box jump matters. How they box squat matters. Because where are those forces going? Are their muscles absorbing them and accepting them, or are they not? And to get an athlete that's better at that, I think you overcome the static better, like you said. And now that may be all just hogwash. I don't know, but your mind goes all sorts of different places when you're trying out theories. So one of these days, maybe I'll have a freak athlete and I'll say, DB Hammer, help me do that. Who knows?
Yeah, that's the dream. And I've learned a lot. In every coach's experience, they always have their magical athlete that propels them into the stratosphere or whatever else. And I've been fortunate to have a couple freaks come through my doors in one way or another. And once you see the difference of, like, okay, that's foot stiffness right there. And then once you see the difference of like, oh, that's acceleration, then it all like starts to make sense. For the most part, we're all working with like really good, really, really high level kind of general athletes. And then once you get a freak, it's like everything that all the coaches talk about immediately makes sense, right? Like I've Duncan Hunley has been at Liberty before, and he's a freak power lifter. I think at 18 squatted 800 pounds, right? Like was invited to West Side. And so when you see him train, then it's like, oh, okay, everything Louis said, 100% absolutely true and works. And then, yeah, I've just had some fast people come through my doors, put them on the 1080, you see some things, and it all makes sense. It all really clicks in. But if you have somebody who just isn't at that kind of freak level, there's all these different, as you kind of said, like force and power leaks happening. So you have to really correct a lot of those to have any attempt to get them to that freak level.
Staying down this line of thinking, you've worked through it all. You've worked through cleans, Olympic lifts, box squats, accommodating resistance, and you've managed to take the effective parts, put them in, and then while kind of doing away with some of the other stuff that didn't keep you bound to an idea. Like, you got a free flowing living room. You can change as you need to. How have you kind of been able to make that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So how have I made that work? I'm in an extremely unique setting within a university. So I am in a club sports department that's not NCAA, right? So as soon as you kind of hear that, it's like, all right, that's a little weird. Liberty Club Sports is different, which is absolutely different. Just give us a Google and you'll see. There aren't very many non-NCAA programs at schools that sell 3,500 hockey tickets and pack out an ice rink and different things like that, or travel the way we do. There aren't many non-NCAA strength and conditioning programs at a university that have 2 full-time, 2 GAs, a part-time, and a 1080, right? Just kind of is what it is. So along those lines, though, I've been able to modify things because as soon as I got my job, I was right at the top. I was the director. So no one told me like, hey, you have to do it this way, or hey, you don't have to do it this way. So I've just been super blessed with that. I don't have to answer to anyone for how I run my training, other than the athletes care and they want to get better, and the coaches care and they want to win. So as long as I am writing workouts that help teams win, life is good, and we've had success. I've slowly realized too, it's great coaches and great athletes that make winning teams. Anytime you start to get cocky in the strength and conditioning world, just realize too, like, it ain't you. Just a heads up there. It's the coaches and it's the players. But anyway, I've had a lot of people get hurt, right? And that really, really affected me. I took it so personally of that athlete got hurt on the ice, on the field, on the court, on the mat, or, worst case scenario in the weight room. And so you really start to take that personally when those things start to happen. And I slowly started to remove things that were, I don't want to say high risk, but that just maybe wasn't worth it if there was a less costly alternative. So the first one that kind of got eliminated was cleans from my program. And like, don't get me wrong, I love Olympic weightlifting. I've competed in it. I've worn the singlet, worn the shoes, got on stage, flew around the country to compete, like did the whole thing. Wasn't very good, but I've done it, right? I love it. But I'm sitting, running a hockey workout. I look left and right, and okay, of my 25-man roster, I have 7 guys who are healthy enough between their wrists, their elbows, and their shoulders to do a clean. Maybe this isn't the best exercise for hockey players in season. Maybe I should switch to weighted jumps. So we do that, and it works, and everyone could do it. And I could teach somebody to do it in 5 seconds. Put this in your hands and jump. Okay, it looks great. Whereas I've had hockey players before where it's like spend a whole year trying to teach them how to do a clean well, and they're using less than 95 pounds the whole year. They just didn't get better. right? Or like, they're injured and they can't do it for a while and their back's hurt or whatever else. And so we eliminate that. And then I went through a couple of years with terrible AC joint injuries. So if you know anything on hockey, like it's an extremely difficult sport on the body, and the shoulder is like prime enemy number one. I don't think I've had any men's players make it to my level that haven't had like a catastrophic shoulder injury. Just is what it is. And so I'm talking around and, hey, how do I fix these AC joint injuries? And someone says to me, really work on their bench press technique. Okay. We do that and it cleans up a lot, like less injuries. Awesome. And then I started to think, okay, full at the bottom bench, it's a little tight. What if we went to a 1 board or a 2 board? All right. So we start doing board pressing, and man, the injuries get better then still. Then I start to think, what if I do something crazy and we do not bench press, and the injuries went down even more? And so, yeah, my route has just kind of been like, number one, I don't really have people to tell me what to do, what not to do. I get to write the workouts, and as long as the teams do well and athletes are happy and coaches are happy, great. And then two, like I have a lot of scars and wounds from great athletes getting hurt in the weight room or out on the field, so to speak, and taking it personally and just trying to find routes that don't make them hurt as much. But again, like I'm in a college hockey setting, and by the time they get to me, they just play junior hockey or for 2 or 3 years. And if you're not familiar with that system, it's worth a Google. So they'll play 70 games a year or more for years on end with a terrible lifestyle. And then they come to me. So when I get my freshman and college hockey players, they're already 20, 21 years old. Like they already have a lot of mileage on them. So just because, these things worked for me doesn't mean it's going to work for your freshman high school basketball player. I just really, really believed that what every coach does in some way, it's going to work. It just really depends on their recruits, their setting, their logistics. And yeah, you really have to cater it towards like your specific athletes. Don't just steal and cookie cutter programs. It's a good way to start, if you're young or whatever, but eventually, just based off of who you commonly and typically recruit, you really have to modify and adjust for those athletes.
It's easy to get stuck on what's working.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Your wins in the strength and conditioning world are always going to kind of keep you afloat, but be willing to look at what's missing, what's not working, what you can drop from a program, and maybe what you can replace it with to fix some of the weak spots you're seeing across the board. How much of a coach's eye does that take? And then how do you balance it so that your program's not super long and you're keeping it to 4 or 5, whatever the exercises are you want? Finding that balance in there where you're addressing weak spots, finding weak spots, but not getting carried away.
Yeah. Anyone who knows that answer, please reach out to me and give me a good, just help me out. So that's, man, I feel like that's every coach's struggle of, okay, I got to do this and I got to do this and I got to do this. And oftentimes when you're getting educated by somebody and listening to somebody, what setting are they in? The private world versus the high school versus the college versus professional. It's all completely different, right? Like in this entire hockey season, the 23-24 season, I worked with my top team, my men's hockey team, for 30 minutes twice a week. There ain't a whole lot I'm going to do in 30 minutes twice a week, right? Like that's just, it is what it is. That's what I had versus my women's team. I had 3 45-minute workouts, right? So we could do a little bit more. But there's always going to be, depending on your setting, the typical injuries that arise. You're never going to win the injury battle, but you have to keep that in mind, right? If you're working with a team that jumps a lot, all right, hey, the knees are probably going to be a little bit sore. So really choose your exercises wisely to mitigate that. If you're working with high power athletes, okay, they need that juice. Make sure you're choosing your exercises accordingly. And then for me, again, I really, really am a believer of having a kind of, we're going to call it a max effort type of day and a dynamic effort day. For me, I think of it more through the lens of an acceleration focused day and a top end speed type of day. So my larger knee bend angled day exercises are going to be on Monday, and then my not so knee angle bending exercises are going to be on Wednesday. And that's really the lens I use of, all right, let's take the sport and what's going to be the best exercises for that sport with that level of athlete. And then I just really believe in an acceleration and a top end speed type of focus. And that helps you kind of choose and select which exercises will go there. And then, the classic of depends on the time of the year and whatever else and what your overall goals are. But oh man, it's just such a struggle to fit it all in, to get it all in. And yeah, I haven't figured that one out. Every day I write a workout and I try to jam more in there, but yeah, we're all limited by our logistics. You have some guys in the high school setting that have 75 athletes, and then you have some guys in the private setting that might only have 5 or 10. And I say to my athletes all the time when they work with me in smaller groups, like, man, that was great. I was like, yeah, I know, but like, try to think it's just you in here and we used all 6 of our racks. How am I supposed to run this with the team? It's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That's why I love the off seasons. The off seasons keep me sane as a coach because I can finally do like what I want to do and fit everything in, so to speak.
Now you've talked about it some. You have a 1080. The majority of the population doesn't have a 1080. So I haven't been dodging that, but I kind of have a little. But touching on the 1080, what are some things that it showed you that you could bring back to somebody that didn't have a 1080 and try to improve? Resisted sprints, assisted sprints, sleds. What has the 1080 shown you that you could break down if you didn't have it and still see improvements?
Yeah, great question. So the 1080 sprint has taught me that every single thing that Chris Korfist says is 100% true, accurate, and will work. I have made people faster by just blindly following everything that he says to do, and it all works. You got to have strong feet. You have to have mobile ankles. You have to be able to get into, a 4-foot rocker. You have to have an incredible strength in your glute medius and opposite oblique to be able to hike your hip up. You need remarkable core strength to not over rotate. You got to drive through the big toe, everything there. And the results speak for itself. The data speaks for itself. Like if you want to get somebody faster, go listen to your episode with Chris Korfist, attend the Track Football Consortium, buy his digital products. Like it is tried and true. It absolutely works. He's a phenomenal mind and everything. So that's first and foremost. Like that's what the 1080 has taught me is everything with Chris Korfist works, and you do not necessarily need a 1080 sprint to figure that out. I have an article in my mind called the Home Depot Speed Workout. If I have PVC pipes, cones, and a 300-foot tape measure, I could run a world-class speed workout. And again, how did I get the idea for a tape measure? Put an external cue between your legs, don't step on it. Like that was all Chris, right? He's given out tons of information. His YouTube channel is great to follow right now. I think one of Tony Holler's sons are helping him out with that. Praise God. But that combined with a lot of people lack the ability to hold the proper angles and positions for their body weight during acceleration. That's been a really, really big one for me. So with the 1080 right now, we have capabilities to run force velocity profiles with the click of a button. It used to be you had to have a bunch of timing gates or stalker radar gun to get velocities, and then you plug it in JB Marin's spreadsheet online, and then pray to God you could read it and figure it out. So once I started really hammering down some force velocity profiles, like just this past week, I ran like over 60 on some hockey prospects. You can really start to see trends, and most often they are not having a great rate of force max. So meaning they're producing too much vertical force and not enough horizontal. And that just there is they can't hold good positions because they have weakness in the foot or weakness in the ankle or lack of mobility in the ankle, weakness around the knee joint. Their back isn't strong enough to hold these positions. And then from there, their force per body weight isn't there as well. So if you are familiar for force velocity profiling, their force per kilogram is pretty low. But that right there is just like, that's what we've been saying and preaching for however long, of like, start with strength, get them strong. And that really raises the boats for everything. So on the 1080, we're always trying to increase our power per pound, our watts per kilogram. And for the large majority of the people that I've coached and that I work with, the low hanging fruit is still the low hanging fruit. Work on that strength aspect of things. And then, just watching a lot of people sprint by sitting on the 1080 and like watching them run away from me. People have crazy crossover gait. And so that is where your foot is supposed to land directly under your hips. And so it could be a foot issue, or it could be a lack of weakness in your lateral sling. So in other words, your glute medius isn't strong enough to control your foot when it's on the ground. And then your opposite oblique isn't strong enough to position your hip where it needs to be as you're swinging your leg through. So those are some easy things to kind of see and pick up on when I'm sitting on the 1080. If you video it and you see someone's foot in, right down the middle or under their opposite butt cheek, yeah, you're gonna know there's some issues there that need to be addressed. But man, go listen to your episode with Chris Corfus. Go just follow him, and you're going to be led down the promised land. I promise that.
Now, you brought up line sprinting, and I had a sprinter I was helping a while back. I'm not by any means a sprint coach. She wanted some help, and I'm like, hey, I'll do everything I can. Mm-hmm. And I did notice that her line work wasn't very good. She really struggled splitting the line. Her feet were on the line a lot of times. Mm-hmm. That led me to believe, or led me down the road to ask the question, I guess I should say, do you sprint your hockey players on the ice down a line? Will that show up, or do the skates throw that off?
Yeah, that's a great question. So with, I do bring my 1080 on the ice. I do have players skate on ice being tracked with my 1080. I just learned this past summer a method for sitting it on the ice where you could have somebody sprint. For the most part, I have it on the dry land and they skate. So it really depends on what you believe in, form and technique wise, for skating. There's two different camps in the hockey world. There is you bring both feet together under your body camp. And then there's you keep your feet really wide camp. I fall into you bring both feet together under your body. So that way you have more time to push into the ice and create more force and power and all that. So I don't necessarily have them skate over a line, because in hockey, I want you skating straight ahead at 45-degree angles, which sounds a little weird. So when you bring your heels back together, I never want them straight forward, because you can't apply force straight forward on ice. So you always have to have your toes out at, let's just say, like 10 and 2. So for those that aren't watching the video, just imagine stand together, your heels are together under your body, and point your toes out to 10 and 2 on a clock. And that's kind of the good position for a hockey player. So again, even though they're skating forward, we're kind of skating at 45-degree angles as we're pushing it. So the line could be helpful, but for the most part, not something I've used, just because of the nuances of skating.
Where I'm from, hockey's not a big thing. So all of this related to hockey is new to me. I'm just trying to bring it over to some sports I do maybe know a little bit more about.
It's huge in St. Louis. I'll say that. Yeah, you're in the right state, just the wrong side of it. Let's just word it that way.
St. Louis is like a foreign country.
Yeah.
us over
Yeah,
on
that's what
the
you're saying.
west side of the state. Now they may think the same thing. They may think, we're just a bunch of rednecks over here. I don't know. But yeah, Missouri is very strange that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Introducing new ideas to successful programs.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be a way to prove to a sport coach that you can offer him something better than what he already has, or what she may already have. How are you able to successfully do that and keep pushing the bar a little bit more and a little bit more?
These are all awesome questions. So I've been in the same place for 10 years, which really in this field like makes me a dinosaur in an area, right? So I started July 2014 at Liberty, and hopefully July 2024 I'll still be there. So I just have an incredible relationship going at it for a decade long with my coaches, my men's coach, my women's coach. They're the same guys that I've been working with for 10 years. So at this point in time, there's nothing too wild or too crazy that I bring up that they're going to say no to. It just kind of is what it is. We're extremely close. We talk every single day with each other. I'll work with their kids, sort of thing. So it's just different. It's not your typical sports setup. However, it did take a while to kind of get there, right? So you can't come out hot and heavy is what I've learned. Never try to approach a coach who's been coaching for longer than you have, or who wants to be the young hot shot type of thing, and say like, hey, what you've been doing is wrong and I'm going to change everything. Or hey, all the tradition that you've believed in the past is wrong. How you trained as an athlete is wrong. All your friends in the field that train a certain way, like, don't do that. It has to be small, bite-sized pieces. And Ross Garner and I have been saying it for a while, but very recently, of like, you can't be a prophet in your hometown. So know the sport, know who the big dogs are, know the buzzwords, and know who they value. So if I was working in the wrestling world, I would be saying, hey, I saw Kyle Dake doing this. Hey, I heard Dan Gable used to say this. Hey, Daniel Cormier, for a current wrestler, they're going to know, who DC is. Hey, Daniel Cormier said he wished he did this more. Hey, Jordan Burroughs, to get his, blast double, he really drilled this a lot. And so for me in the hockey world, I literally, I just is what it is. I would lie sometimes of saying like, I saw this at Minnesota. Hey, guys in the NHL, we're trying this. What do you think? So like really kind of buttering the coaches up in a sense, and just using the right buzzwords for them. And they'll just be like, okay. Yeah. Well, if they're doing it, they're big dogs. Like, I want to do that. So years ago, if I was working with women's basketball, I'd be like, man, Pat Summitt at Tennessee was doing this. I really want to implement it. Like, what do you think? Yep. Let's do it. So just trying to play the soft skills social game of, in any way you can, like, try to help them understand, like, you're not just coming up with this random idea on your own. It's from this big dog or person that they know, like, and respect and trust, or whatever else. That's a really, really great way to start to get wild and crazy. Because like when you approach your athletic director and say, hey, I'd love a $20,000 investment for this sprint machine that only one athlete could use at a time, but I promise it's going to be really, really good. You really have to say like, hey, every team in the NHL has one of these. Every major NCAA Division I hockey program has one of these. Here's what I would like to do with it. Here's where the game is going. It's getting much, much faster. But right now we don't have a great way to train or test speed on or off the ice. What do you think? How do you think we could kind of swing this? So yeah, just having that, we'll just say like the social IQ to really work with people and know and find out who's important to them, drop those names. And That's how you could really get away with a lot of the wild, crazy, funky stuff.
You talked about Dan Gable in there, and I had some questions on wrestling. I know you worked with some wrestlers.
Oh yeah.
And my wife's family's from Iowa, so
okay, all right.
So Dan Gable, it's like they probably, back in the old days, they probably had a picture of Jesus and a picture of Dan Gable on their walls. That's just how it was. He was. I mean, there just isn't too many people that are as intense as he is, and always pushing that conditioning, push. Is there a point where the VO2 max is reached and the conditioning is not helping your wrestling and it's starting to detract from it?
Absolutely. Yeah. Real quick on that, you kind of remind me of saying picture of Dan Gable and Jesus. I've watched a lot. I'm a huge UFC fan, so become a fan of all the martial arts that mix into it. And over in Dagestan, all the big wrestling halls, they have these massive posters of all their politicians, like a huge, just a 20 by 20 poster of Putin, hanging from the wall. It's just awesome. Cracks me up, like just trying to think of, somebody here having our politicians, their, sports heroes hanging up would be great. But yeah, absolutely. I've learned a lot from Mike Boyle within the hockey world. And he would kind of just always say to his players, like, hey, go back, fail your VO2 max test, and just dominate on the ice and be the fastest, most powerful guy. And you could look at different studies, whatever, and you could see how within the NHL, for example, as VO2 max scores have gone down, the speed of the game has gone up. Right. And arguably right now it's the fastest, most skilled, the league has ever been, the NHL, that is. And so, yeah, at a certain point, you have enough on your VO2 max and you really just need to hammer speed, power, and skill of the sport. I think too many times you could spend too long working on a quality that isn't sport specific, and you're just gonna lose out time on that. It just kind of is what it is. Like, nowadays sports are so skilled, and the skills are getting executed so fast with the introduction, or just the mass popularity of all these club teams. Like, these kids are really, really good. They're great at throwing a baseball, hitting a baseball, swinging their arm and spiking a volleyball, whatever else. And so if you don't have that like big skill component to it, you could be as in shape as you want. Like, you ain't going to play. So I think way back in the day when it was just like, we're going to wrestle during wrestling season, then like, yeah, you need to be absolutely fit. And don't get me wrong, if you're just an absolute freak and you have such a mind for the game and you're so well coached, having a bigger gas tank will help. But for me, I've just found that if I really, really chase down the conditioning route too much, it detracts from sports skill opportunities, especially like where I'm at in the college level. Guys just need to keep getting polished, keep understanding the game, improving their game IQ, and that's going to help. And kind of going back to what I was saying with DB Hammer, I've conditioned players extremely well for hockey without making their eyes bleed and throwing up through lactic, acid bath type of workouts. Just really focus on having, some aerobic base that we're going to build, but it's the high power outputs, right? That conditions you for the game. And two, like nothing will condition you for the end of the game, big moment, and you have to make 3 or 4 very quick decisions and make a play, quite like playing the sport and your coach putting you in those situations in practice. I don't care what your VO2 max is. Like, you need to be conditioned for reacting. So like in hockey, if you're not ready to react to the player, the puck, or the position you're on the ice, I don't care. You can be the most in shape hockey player in the world. Like, you're not going to execute properly. So yeah, that's kind of my pedestal soapbox I stand on, is don't over condition aimlessly. Like, condition for the game, make it very specific towards the demands of the game as much as you possibly can.
And Louis Simmons talked about it, and I think Lance Armstrong actually kind of proved it, was there's a VO2 max ceiling. And once you reach that, what are you doing? You know what I mean? You can only increase it to a certain level, and that's why they were using oxygenated blood. That's why they were trying to sleep in hyperbaric chambers. They were doing anything in the world they could do to try to figure out how to get an edge through the VO2 max, and they weren't able to do it until they, obviously figured out how to rig the system a little bit. But I kind of look at that every once in a while. It's like, at what point is the VO2 max ceiling reached, and now we're just overdoing it?
Yeah, and to what methods are you using to improve that aerobic base, and is that starting to become detrimental to the qualities that really matter, or just beating up your body and whatever else? So there's running. Okay, well, high volume running, or just look at high volume runners. There's not many speed power sports. I want that type of body, and just the overall wear and tear that's going to have on your joints. Okay, now we're just like grinding ourselves down. But if we use a bike, perfect. All right, now we're in a very shortened hip position in a society that is very seated, and just already having experiences of upper lower cross syndrome, and over tightness of our hip flexors, deactivation of our glutes, over tightness of our chest muscles, deactivation. Right, so like it's just kind of this vicious cycle where just get to the level that you need, build up all the other qualities, and be specific to the sport, work on the skill. I really think that there isn't enough skill focus in a lot of sport training, unfortunately. And that's the gem right there. Just be really, really good at your sport. I've coached so many hockey players who were incredibly strong, incredibly fast, fit, athletic, all that, but they couldn't handle the puck, right? So like at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Like you got to be able to play your sport and play it really well.
Now, looking into that a little bit, me and you had talked about, we had talked about this earlier in the week, but people coach and teach what they know or how they were shown. Mm-hmm. Good, bad, indifferent. So all the changes that the coaches I talk to want to see in strength and conditioning in sports, it's going to take generations. Mm-hmm. Because all you can model after is what you know until you go find a different mentor. Mm-hmm. Understanding that and learning to overcome whatever biases you may have had in the past, how were you able to do that?
I think it just goes back to earlier of having so many people get hurt. I'm in a very, very weird situation at Liberty where an hour and a half hour south of me in Chatham, Virginia, is Functional Movement Systems World Headquarters. So if you've ever heard of FMS, if you've ever heard of Gray Cook, Lee Burton, SFMA, whatever else, all of that is an hour south of me. And also here, kind of in our Liberty sphere, we have Dr. Jeff Lowe's, who I would love to become more popular on the podcast circuit, because he's a monster. But he's our Liberty team chiropractor. If you call him a chiropractor, it's almost offensive. Like he just knows the body to the point where, like, I won't share his resume, but there's $1 million athletes that call him up, right? And so we're in this weird bubble where you have a guy that travels the world and goes and speaks overseas through interpreters an hour south of us. And then you have this incredible practitioner 5 minutes down the road from our school. So after enough people kind of get hurt and go to them, you really start to just modify and change exercises based off of that. And then you start to learn, like, okay, this female athlete was incredibly strong, one of the strongest on the team, but was still injuring her back all the time because she just didn't know how to brace her core properly. All right, shoot, maybe these stupid bird dogs with a cone on your back have a lot of place in a college workout. Okay, as I've started to learn this developmental sequence, all right, this guy's a freak, but he can't do a dead bug. So what kind of compensation patterns are going throughout the body? all right, this athlete can't even do a bear crawl driving through their big toes. What is happening when they're sprinting, right? Like if they can't do it in the most fundamental cross crawl pattern, the easiest, most basic 4 points of contact on the ground, like we got some issues here. So just viewing it from that lens of like, I just don't want people hurt. And then having all these experts around me that have told me like, hey, what you're doing is okay, but just so you know, like here's the consequences of it. It's completely shaped and changed around everything that I do. And I'm just like, I'm so grateful for those learning opportunities and experiences. So I would just like recommend to everybody, learn movement systems, like really start with the basics and easy stuff. I promise you, like it's going to look so stupid and so dumb, and it's not fun. It's not very sexy, but bottom line, everybody will come back to that at some point or another. Eventually, your race car will crash and you have to send it to the mega mechanic. You can't just work on it in the pits anymore. And yeah, that's just I've lived that experience a couple times too many. So yeah, I just have that kind of like cemented and built in, but super fortunate to have those resources around me as well.
We're going to take a hard right turn right here. So getting ready for this podcast, I went back and listened to Victory Over Self, and I went back to some of your original stuff where you were breaking down some conferences, some clinics. You went and listened to different people speak. There again, the DV Hammer stuff, analyzing different things and what your guys' takes were. How do you manage to get the most out of a clinic? I mean, do you sit there with a notebook? What hits you? How do you make that work so that when you come home, it's not information overload and you have a resource that you can go back and be like, yeah, that's what he was saying. Okay, I understand that.
So, I love all these questions. These are great. So I am holding in my hand right here. I'm going to lowball estimate like $3,000 in here of just various clinics and conferences and whatever. So you were talking about being a big notebook guy. I as well. So I got this one's almost filled out, and this was Track Football Consortium 2023 in Chicago. So Bobby Stroop talking a bunch. So correct me if I start going too wrong here on answering this question, but getting the most out of a conference early in your career, first couple you go to, just shut up and listen. Like you have no clue what you're doing. Like you just have no idea. And that's how I was. Like I genuinely had no idea. I remember going to NSCA conferences, which I think is a great place to start. Just because there's so many speakers at these, coaches conferences, national conferences, even regional clinics. And my assistant Blair and I, we were at the time, my assistant, we sat down with like the speaker list, and we like, I like the title of this one. I'm going to go to that one. All right, I like this. I'm going to go to that one. And I remember I went to some like brutal one, and he went and saw Joe Ken, and he came back. He's like, oh, it was unbelievable. Like this guy's so good. He was this and this. I was like, shoot. All right, what was his name? Joe Kenny. All right, right. Like I didn't know who Joe Ken was. And so I think like just go and get as much exposure as possible, and just go for like the ones you're interested in, and just learn as much as you can. And when you do, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like don't go to a conference, completely throw out everything that you had and start implementing that guy's stuff. Like you were doing something for a reason, just kind of modify it slightly to start, and then, whatever else. So I would say I did that for a solid 3 to 4 years. I've just attend things and just listen as much as I can. That's why podcasts are so great. It's why everyone should listen to every one of your guests, because they're going to get out of that what they would at any other kind of conference. Then from there, a shift started to change where, a presenter would present on something, and I'd have a little kind of like follow-up question, and I would seek them out after. Something else I've learned is like, ask them while they're up there, because other people have that question too. So just ask them, right? So it's scary. It's intimidating. Step up to a mic at a coaches conference in the NSCA, and there's hundreds of people in the room, and thousands online. But like, do it then. Don't get on the line afterwards and bother them. That's kind of just my opinion. But in I think it was 2017, I attended an RPR conference, RPR certification at William and Mary with Eric Corum, Kier Winenflat, Scott Kuhn, kind of running the show there, and Chris Corfus was running it. I never met Chris, nothing like that. Kind of heard through him about him through Tony Holler and Cal Dietz. And so his flight gets delayed. We get an email like, "Hey, show up at 12 instead of 9." And we were also kind of going there for Kier, so we showed up probably at like 10, and Chris was there. I was like, yeah, my flight actually didn't get delayed. Like, I showed up early, but we're still going to start at 12. So I was with Ross and Blair, and I had questions, and I just sat there and I raised my hand and said, "Hey, do you mind if I just pound you with questions for the next hour or so?" And he goes, "Yeah, sure." And so like I just started, and that was kind of my gateway drug. And then the next track football consortium, or my first track football consortium, I was in the crowd, and Chris like pointed me out. I was like, "Oh, I remember you. You're the questions guy." I was like, "Okay, here we go. I guess that's going to be me." And I just started to have like a confidence, I guess, because like I heard the material enough, or I just really, really wanted to get the answers to the questions that I had for my athletes. So I just kept sticking my hand up. And yeah, if anyone's ever attended a conference with me, like, I apologize. Like, I'm gonna work that speaker like crazy, man. Like, if you're there, like, I promise you, I will get the most out of you. And yeah, I've gotten to a point of just being super comfortable and learning, like, it doesn't matter to be the guy that doesn't know or wants clarity or asking questions, because 9 times out of 10, somebody else is going to have the exact same one. Just sort of is what it is. So yeah, if you ever attend a track football consortium and you see a guy with a beard and glasses rocking Liberty stuff, just know you're in for one, because I will be working you. But yeah, early on, just go and listen. Like, you're unconsciously incompetent. You don't even know what you don't know. Just absorb it all, and you'll slowly start to find your path. And then realize too, like, while you're there, you're there to learn to help your athletes, right? Like, I try to tell my interns all the time, like, these athletes are coming to Liberty and they're putting their hopes, dreams, goals, and wishes in our hands. How dare we not give them absolutely everything that we can? So if that means, sucking it up, raising your hand, and asking a question that seems dumb to other people, like, that's what you need to do for these kids, because they've dedicated their whole life to a sport. They're playing it in a college level at a high level, and they have dreams and goals, and we're part of that. So yeah, ask the question, learn everything you can, because it's not about us. Like, it's about serving them.
There's a couple things in there. So when I was really riding a lot of colts and I was really pushing down the horse avenue, that was the way I was going to go. I had a chance to go ride like with Buck Brannaman and guys like that. Okay. And it just got to be, man, when you first start going, it's just information overload. Yeah, you're scared to ask. You're scared that, those guys they're type A personalities. There's a lot of people there. They have the microphone on. It takes a little bit to get comfortable in that setting, but once you do, the amount you can learn is incredible.
Absolutely. Wow. And then to add on to that, I was at an NSCA conference, a guy named Peter Twist. He's, big dog in the hockey world. Gets done presenting, his unbelievable presentation. I go up afterwards, say, "Hey, like, that was great. Do you have any like resources I can find to just learn a bit more?" And he's like, "Oh, I wrote a book." And like, I went back and I was like, "You dummy. Like, just Google this person before you go and ask a question. Like, don't waste their time like that." So that's the other thing. Like, before I hop on this podcast with you, I'm going to do a little research. You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to try to find, okay, articles, books. Is there anything podcast wise that you've been a guest on? Like, let me just know a little bit. And two, like, if you go into something knowing a little bit more, then you kind of weed through some things and ask better questions. Like I give an example all the time. If I go to a conference this summer and I'm sitting down next to my graduate assistant, theoretically, they know less than I know, but I'm going to take more notes, right? The more you know, the more you can learn. So really like dive in. If you're going to a speed-based conference, learn as much as you can about speed, and then you're just gonna deepen your learning in that. You're gonna be able to ask better questions, and that's like I think too. That's what has really gotten the ball rolling for me in the track football consortium world with Tony, with Chris, with Dan Fichter, with Cal Dietz, and company that show up to those events. Is just like, yeah, just do some homework, do some background, understand things, and then you could ask better questions.
Now let's take this totally the other direction.
Yeah, I love it. It's great.
Demanding jobs that we as people are passionate about, they can really blur the lines on family. You get to a point where you can't decompress from the stress because you enjoy the stress, but you need to. How do you draw a clear-cut line on, like, okay, all this baggage stays on this side of the line, and my wife, my kids, things I enjoy other than that are on this side of the
line? I kind of want to say I'm a little too young in the field to have great wisdom, but here's what I got so far. First and foremost, have the proper identity, and here's what I mean by that. Every strength conditioning coach within a college setting at some point has interacted with the sports psychologist, and hopefully part of that sports psychology thing is helping the athletes to understand that their identity is not in their performances, their identity is not in their sport. Because one day you're going to get injured, one day you're going to graduate, one day you're not going to play your sport anymore, right? So if all your value and all your self-worth is wrapped up in your sport or your job, you're in trouble. And the pressure is going to build so much that you're not going to be able to handle it. You're going to do stupid things. All of a sudden you're going to get hurt, and now that's going to be your new identity. I wish I could have, I should have, but I always got hurt. You can get fired at any point in this field. Right? It is extremely volatile with no job security whatsoever. So, if you're in that college setting, hopefully your athletes have kind of hammered in identity to you. So just me, my background, how I've been my whole life. I am a Christian. Jesus is the center of my world. I try to serve him every day. So number one would be just identity. I am a servant of Christ first and foremost. And then what I do kind of on the side is this whole strength conditioning thing. So for those out there that, don't follow Christianity, try to find an identity that is not wrapped up in your job. Otherwise it's just, you're in for a world of hurt. And man, you hear it so often on podcasts where it's the host or it's the guest of, I made it to the top. And then I ask myself, all right, now what? All right, like I'm on a call weekly with a guy who made it to the NHL and a guy who made it to the Olympics, and both of them were not Christians at the time, and they all shared, I literally did it. I accomplished my dream as an athlete, and then I was like, is this it? I think, is this all I'm good for? So eventually, you're going to get that incredible dream job at the school, and all right, is this it? Is this all I'm doing now? I can only go down from here. So work on your identity. Talk to any good sports psychologist, and they're going to point you in the direction of a good identity. The second one for me is marry the right person. My wife graciously puts me in my place nonstop. And I have the heart towards, I want to serve her. I want to love her. I want to honor her. If my heart wasn't that way towards my wife, like she's not the right person. Right. So, I always want to do right by her, give her the most that I can of myself, on my good days. And, she absolutely keeps me in check and keeps me in balance. Like it's very necessary. And then from there, you just got to seek out the wise mentors. So we released a podcast with Mike Boyle recently, and I just kind of like dug in on the wisdom of like, hey, you're older in this field, you're still married, and for the most part, seems like your kids don't hate you. Like, how did you do that? And Anthony Donskov is a hockey guy from Columbus, Ohio, has a great podcast himself. He had on Fergus Connolly, Mike Boyle, Buddy Morris, and Dan Paff, I think. And he asked all of them, like, what's the key to a successful marriage in this field? And they all have shared, like, well, at one point, I got so deep and heavy into it, my wife was like, yeah, you're either gonna, figure it out or we're not gonna be together anymore. And just like it is what it is. When I got married, like divorce was not an option. And so yeah, there's been conversations we've had where it's like, hey, you need to figure this out. And that's a really part of finding the right woman. And then I got real scared listening to a podcast once. This person that I borderline like idolize, right? Blah blah blah, whatever, my ex-wife, blah blah whatever. And I went like, okay, the three big dogs that I like learn a lot from have all been divorced at least once. That's not an option for me. So I really, really need to stay in check with all this. And then the kind of last piece there is I had a really good mentor who kind of came through that FMS system, through the Liberty system, and he gave a presentation to our football strength staff. And basically he was like, if you want to be the best, you have to have a singular focus. And it was like an arrow or a ladder type of analogy there. Like you just got to have a singular focus. This is it. This is all you can do. Years later, I was talking to him as I was about to move to North Dakota to be closer to my wife's family because, I didn't want to get divorced over my job. And I was like, hey, I've been living like this and whatever. And he goes, oh, yeah. It turns out I was wrong. You need to have a hobby. Like, you need to have something outside of this. He's like, I just bought a motorcycle. Right. And now, like, that's my hobby. I ride around on a motorcycle. And so I was like, okay. So my hobby became like gardening and farming. We got some chickens, we have fruit trees and fruit bushes. And like, that's the other thing I do. It just helps. Like it helps my wife see me do something else. But man, this field is so fun, right? Like I'm wearing my work t-shirt and my work shorts right now. Like who else gets to say that? Who else gets to play loud music and, scream at people and talk to people like you? And like, it is unbelievable. It is a drug and it is a heat that burns bright, but it could also be incredibly destructive. Right. So you have to have all those kind of ducks in the line. You have to know your identity. You have to be with the right people, the right person, have good support groups, have a hobby, and just, kind of decide who you want to be and try to stay to that true north as much as you possibly can. Long-winded, but like, man, one of my favorite subjects to get into on a podcast. I just try to ask everybody like, hey, how have you stayed married? Or how are you keeping your relationships?
So we've been going at this a while. I didn't get to all the questions I had for you, but that's okay. We can save them for a later day. I know it's getting late where you are, and always good to leave a few questions in the tank. But you talked about your faith there a little bit. So sure. Living out Liberty's tagline, Champions for Christ. Not every kid that walks through there is a Christian, nor wants to be a Christian.
Yes.
But they're still seeing you as a Christian, and whatever impression you make on them is how they are going to interpret Christianity in a lot of instances. So how are you able to navigate that and live out the tagline to be that light for some athletes that you may be the only person they see representing that?
Yeah, it's in 2009 I Googled Christian colleges. Liberty was the first one that popped up, and it had the tagline of training champions for Christ. And I was like, oh, all right, easy. I guess I'm going to Liberty. And yeah, years later, God eventually brought me here. It's fun too to say, like, I'm one of the few people at Liberty that actually trains champions for Christ. Strength condition coach training in the weight room. Yeah, it's a good one to throw around at staff meetings. But the number one thing, if you have a faith background and you're following Christ, following what the Bible kind of tells you, the number one thing is my personal relationship with the Lord is first and foremost the most important thing. Way more important than my job, way more important than my marriage. Like, I need to be in my Bible, in prayer, in praise, glorifying, and adoration of my Lord and Savior. Like, that has to come first and foremost. So when I do that, it's as it says in the book of John, which is part of the New Testament in the Bible. In chapter 15, Jesus talks about abiding. He says, I am the vine, you are the branches, abide or remain in me, and like I will produce fruit through you. So if I'm just dialed in and focused in on my relationship with Christ, my relationship with Jesus, staying again in the word and prayer, he will do the work through me. Like, it's not going to be me working or my good works, because my personal belief is I'm a terrible, awful person. I'm a sinner and I need a savior, right? If I want to get into heaven, which I believe is real, I can't do anything good enough to kind of get there. It's I just need to believe that Jesus died on a cross, was resurrected, and through his life, death, and resurrection, he covered over my sin. So I have to believe all that. And when I have that abiding relationship with him, he does all the work. So there have been times where I'm speaking with an athlete, whether they know the Lord or not, and I'll just forget. And months later, they'll say like, "Hey, you really, really impacted me when you said this." Like, I said that? Like, can't even remember. I had no clue, right? And like, in a college setting, there's a hard stop after 4 or 5 years. They're gone, and so they'll share something with you every now and then. And it's really just like, it sounds simple, sounds basic, it ain't easy. Of remain in Christ and he will do all the work through you. That's how I do it. And then too, like, it's really easy when you love what you do, right? Like, I could just show up and just have fun, right? Like, I'm in an athletic department. I look around at like people in the finance or marketing jobs, and like, those look brutal. Like, look at what you're wearing. Like, you're in an office all day. I'm standing, yelling at people, like having fun. And it's a little bit easier to shine a light, so to speak, when you're really, really enjoying what you're doing. And then too, like, just this is what it is. No matter who it is, I want to win. And so hopefully that enthusiasm comes through me and they realize like, okay, he really cares about me, either for this reason or nonetheless, like, he just wants to be the most successful athlete I can be. And if I am, holistically happy with, my life, my relationships, school's going well, and my training and my sport, that's going to make me the best player. Right? You kind of read it at the top of the hour here of better parts make a better whole. So getting to know each athlete individually, speaking as much like hope, love, faith, whatever, but just like good training into them, it really, really goes a long way and makes a difference. I don't do it great every single day. I try to. Like I said, like I am human. I am a sinner, but hopefully more often than not, I get out of the way and let Jesus do the work.
Well, Coach, I really feel like that one's probably a good one to wrap up on. I've had an unbelievable time. I should have done this sooner than what I did, but you were gracious enough to wait on my timing, and just what an unbelievable podcast. So thank you very much.
I appreciate that. I'm a little long-winded, so hopefully I didn't, snooze too many people and they make it towards the end here. But man, like I said, your guest list on these podcasts are just unbelievable. Like, just true giants in the industry, people that I bought, spent a ton of money either going to listen to them or buying resources or whatever else, and stalking them on podcasts. So thank you for doing all that you're doing. I definitely know it can be a stressful thing, whatever else, but keep fighting the good fight and getting good information out there, because there's young coaches like you and I were one day starting out, and the more good information that gets out there, the more athletes that can be helped. So thank you for having me on. I'm very, very humbled by it, and just appreciate the opportunity.
Well, thank you very much. All that means the world to me. I was blessed to have guys just be gracious and say yes, and they never had to. I didn't have much to offer, but they did. So, we'll just keep running it and see what happens.
Yeah. Amen to that. Keep rocking and rolling. Appreciate it.
All right, Coach. Well, have a wonderful evening.
Yeah. Thank you. You as well.